Welcome to the NHL Wraparound podcast featuring Neil Smith, President General Manager of the 1994 Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers, and longtime ESPN NHL veteran Vic Morren. Together, they share no-nonsense opinions on news and issues around the National Hockey League. Whether you're a casual or diehard fan, each episode of NHL Wraparound will leave you more informed. Now, here's your hosts, Neil and Vic.
Welcome to NHL Wraparound. Vic Morren and Neil Smith along with you, and we're going to be joined shortly by the president of hockey operations for the Calgary Flames, Don Maloney. But first, 3 things you need to pay attention to. And let's look at a couple of goal scorers here, Neil. Guys that have really stepped up in Washington and in Colorado. You know, you expect Alex Ovechkin's going to be at the top of the list in Washington, and in the Rocky Mountains, it's going to be Nathan MacKinnon. But a couple of guys surprising the top of the goal scoring charts right now.
Yeah, and Tom Wilson, who's thought of more for his agitating way to play for the Caps and has done a marvelous job of that over the years. But we have seen him develop into more and more of an offensive threat, plays a power play. Well, this year he's starting off already with 5 goals and 1 assist for 6 points in the first 4 games of the season. And so give Tom Wilson a lot of credit. I mean, he's well ahead of Alex Ovechkin in the goal scoring department. And the other guy to come out of the blue, for me at least, was Ross Colton, who started off in his first 6 games with the Avalanche and with Nathan MacKinnon that you mentioned. He's already got 6 goals this season in the first 6 games. So 2 guys that really you should take note of and find out, see how they're going to end the season. I will mention also that Wilson's only got 2 minutes in penalties in the first 4 games, which is odd for him too. Usually he gets that per period.
That's the almost the Stan Mikita reversal. So
that's right.
Right, something worth watching as the season goes on. And just to look ahead a little bit, Wilson's career high in goals, 24, and Colton's 22. Let's go to the defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. They've been playing without Captain Alex Barkov and Matt Tkachuk. However, 4-2-1 record. And it just goes to show that some things just, when you've got a championship level team there, they find ways to win. And the first guy I'm going to look at is Sam Reinhart. And Reinhart had 57 goals last year, didn't even reach 100 points. So far this year, doing a little bit more on the setup. He's got 7 assists, but still has 5 goals.
Yeah, and you're right about the Florida Panthers have got a pretty good record for missing guys like Matt Tkachuk and Barkov, their captain. I mean, it's really been amazing. You take a look at the losses that they took this summer when they lost guys like Lomberg and they lost Ekman Larson off of defense. Montour, and they also, they lost some weapons up front as well, but they filled in nicely. And I would imagine that in the locker room, they're working every bit harder to make up for the lack of having Barkov and Tkachuk in the lineup. So sometimes those injuries spark teams to work even harder. When you've got everybody in your lineup, everybody's waiting for the other guy to do it. Perhaps in their locker room right now, they're all taking the bull by the horns.
They certainly are. They certainly are. And the only unbeaten, untied team, perfect record in the NHL through 2 weeks of the season, the Winnipeg Jets. Now, let's not get too much over our skis here. They have played 4 out of their first 5 at home and 4 out of their first 5 against non-playoff teams. The only playoff team from last year that they've actually beaten was the Edmonton Oilers, a 6-0 whitewash on opening night. But the interesting thing to look at them is that they've gotten goals from 12 different players already. They're getting contributions from all 4 lines. And so Scott Arniel getting a lot out of this club in the early going.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I'm glad you mentioned Scott Arniel because he was their assistant and took over the head job this season. They had a disappointing playoff last season by all accounts and measures. But they're out to a great start. And I personally thought that Winnipeg would struggle this year. I got to be honest about it. I looked at the players they'd lost and, I thought they might struggle, but no, it's hard to beat an NHL team. It doesn't matter who you're playing against, all the way down to the San Jose Sharks, who have not gotten a win yet this season. They're a tough opponent. Everybody's a tough opponent in the NHL. So yes, they have played 4 of the 5 games that they've played have been against last year's non-playoff teams, but still, these wins that they're getting right now, and you know this, Vic, is true. These five wins are going to pay off dividends later in the season because that's 10 points. That's going to be 10 points at the end as much as it's 10 points at the beginning. So, that'll really help their season.
And certainly Arniel pushing a lot of the right buttons. The game Sunday against Pittsburgh, they were down 2-0 in the second period, and Arniel really lit into them pretty good, and they certainly responded.
Yeah, they did respond. And by the end of that second period, they were up 3-2. And then Pittsburgh tied them very early in that third period. I think it was Lars Eller that scored the goal, but then Winnipeg came back at them again with 3 more goals by the end of the contest, and they skated off the ice, winning 6-3. Well, it really is my pleasure now to welcome in Don Maloney, President of Hockey Operations for the Calgary Flames. Don and I go way, way back. Not only do we both share being alumni of the New York Rangers, but we worked together for many years, and they were probably some of the very best years of my career, getting to work with Don Maloney and having a lot of fun doing it. And 2 guys that really, I think, at least from my view, Don, became very close friends. So it's really good to have you on.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Neil. Those are some of the best years that you saved me from wandering out in the desert and brought me back to New York as your assistant. And for that, I'll be forever grateful.
Well, we did have some fun times there, that's for sure. And we started the Hartford Wolfpack, and they're still going to this day, Don. And our signature is sort of on there as the only championship that's ever been in Hartford with the hockey team. So that was a fun year too. Even though it was the end of my run in New York, it was still a fun season for the Wolfpack.
Yeah, it was really, really exciting time. Remember, we took the submarine ride, and which was sort of a really neat experience. I think originally you could tell this story better. It was going to be called the Seawolves, maybe, Neil, and then for whatever reason it had to be switched. But yeah, that was really a great experience. We had good teams. You were able to give us the financial support in Hartford to sign some pretty good players. And I'll tell you, it's so hard, as you know, to win a championship at any level. And that's probably in a lot of ways, maybe one of the highlights of my career, is winning that championship with the Wolfpack.
And we had a really good coach there too, and John Paddock, who is, there's certain people that come and go during your career. I think that teach you how to win and help you win. And certainly John Paddock at that level, at the American Hockey League level, there's no better example. I'd say maybe Bill Dineen too, but of a guy who loved to win and would do anything it took to win. And now, of course, he was a famous coach of Connor Bedard in Regina with the Pats, and has been winning there. But let's move on, Vic, to the Calgary Flames, shall we? And talk to Don about that.
Don, the first thing I wanted to ask you was that coming into the season, I believe a lot of the so-called experts saw the Flames more or less in a bit of a retool. And yet, when you take a look at this roster, and you're one of only 4 clubs that are unbeaten in regulation thus far, you've got some pretty good leadership in Michael Backlund and Blake Coleman. Jonathan Huberdeau looks rejuvenated, as does Nazem Kadri. You brought in a little bit of championship pedigree with Ryan Lomberg from Florida. Mantha comes in. Kevin Ball, part of the Markstrom trade. So there's actually more good pieces in place here than I believe a lot of people realize.
Yeah, Vic, I think that's fair. Hey, let's not kid ourselves. We lost last year. We had a number of veteran players, good players that left us for a variety of reasons. So we came in the summer, and I know from outside there's two ways you could look at it. Vic, you could say, okay, let's go scorched earth and burn it to the ground and get the first round picks for the next few years and then ride off to glory. Well, in my experience, that rarely works, to be honest with you. This started from the top down, from ownership down, to say, hey, you have to have a winning culture to have any kind of success. So, one of my when I addressed the team at the start of training camp, I said, there hasn't been a year. I've been involved in professional hockey for 46 years. And there hasn't been a year that you don't start training camp with the idea of winning a cup. In order to win the cup, you have to get to the playoffs. So our goal is obviously to get to the playoffs. And we know I give Craig Conroy, the manager, Ryan Huska, the head coach, a lot of credit. It really, and the names you mentioned, our leadership, we have really 6 players here that are sort of the core leadership group. And they sort of got them together this summer and said, hey, we're going to go as far as you guys take us. We're not throwing in the towel. We're not saying, oh, let's just get by and let's try and stay around and let's think a top 10 pick. Absolutely not. Our goal is to get to the playoffs. And I really do think it has to be every year. You have to be realistic about it. We're not sitting here and saying, okay, we've done it all and we're weak in the season and we're praying for some sort of pandemic to shut the league down. That's the way we're going to win the cup. That's not the way it works. We had a good start. We know it's a long season. But I give our coaches credit to some of the areas that we were, concerned about going into the season was number one, our goaltending. How's that going to hold up? And again, early on, it's been strong. It's been a strength of ours. Our defense is the second area that we said, we've got some new pieces. When you take out a Tanev, you take out a Hanifin, Zadorov, you bring in a little bit more unproven. There's always a question how we're going to do. And so far, it's been fine. I really thought our forward group as a group is playoff caliber. I think we have enough between Backlund and Kadri. Obviously, Jonathan Huberdeau, need him to come back to the form he showed a few years ago. And fortunately, he's coming with a brand new, fresh attitude. So again, we're not jumping up and down and planning the parade route around Calgary here after, a little more than a week into the season, but it certainly beats the alternative right now.
You got out of the gate 2-7-1 last year, and essentially for 72 games, you're playing catch up, and it's a very difficult position for any club to be in. So this year, you're 4-0-1, and I want to ask you about your head coach, Ryan Huska. Now in his second year, how have you seen him evolve after his first season, and now with the start that the club has had in year 2?
It's a very good question, Vic. It's night and day to me. Ryan came in, as much as he was an assistant coach for many years, once you get into the driver's seat, and especially given the start we had fairly high expectations last year. I thought we could be a playoff team last year. I thought we were deep enough. We had enough veteran players. We had some younger players we were fairly strong on. And you get out to that start, I don't care where you're playing, whether it's Calgary, whether it's New York, whether it's Phoenix. It's you get behind the 8 ball early. It's very, very hard to chase. And on top of that, we had this unrest within our group. All of a sudden there was this narrative every day. Nobody wants to play in Calgary. Nobody wants to sign in Calgary. It's a bad place to play. And it couldn't be further from the truth. This is really a great city to live in and a great place to play hockey. Our fans are loyal. We fill the building. But it was just this narrative that so now you introduce this new head coach. Unfortunately, we tried to find an assistant coach with head coaching experience to kind of help him out a little bit. We weren't successful doing it. And we got off to a slow start. And I think if Ryan was on with us today, he'd be saying the same thing. Those things I'd maybe do different, just understanding the league, the pressure, the schedule. We brought in Brad Larson as an assistant coach this last offseason, who was a head coach in Columbus for a number of years. And I really think he's had a really good influence on Ryan. Just the idea that he's got somebody to throw things off in training camp. We had a very good training camp. And I know nobody pays attention to the record in training camp, but when you have a good camp and you win some games, and it gives a little bit of faith and confidence. You go into the season, and for a team like us that we needed some good signs early. We got some wins early. So hopefully that'll carry us into the season and beyond.
Don, I want to bring up something because you just mentioned it, and about Calgary, the city, and Calgary, the Saddle Dome, and my experience of going there for so many years, and with our clubs. It must be such a difference for you, a guy who's was great player for the New York Rangers in Madison Square Garden, where the noise level is huge. And then in all the American buildings where the noise level goes through the roof some nights. And then now you're in what I consider the quietest building in the league. In fact, tell me and tell the listeners if I'm right or wrong, but it's almost like you can hear the players talking to each other on the ice because the group of fans are so studious that they sit there quietly and really watch the game, like really take it in and take in the nuances of the game of hockey.
Yeah, it's so true, Neil. You have to almost come up here and experience it because New York is a great place to play. Vegas, you go to Vegas and there could be a light go off and people yell and scream. And in Canada here and all the Canadian cities, it is quieter in game. Just because they're watching the game, they understand it. And I laugh. I think in New York, you play there and, the people in New York, they're all, great fans. You might lose the game 6-1. You'd go out to a restaurant after and people be clapping you like, great game. And you're thinking, God, we just lost 6-1. How could it be a great game? In Calgary here, it's a different story. You go out and after a game, you lose 6-1, people just look at you. They're not clapping you in the back. They all know you guys were horseshit tonight. And so it's a whole different mindset. But that being said, I wanted a chance to work in the Canadian market. After I left Arizona, they told me to leave the desert and never come back. I ended up coming up here with Brad Treliving, and I've really enjoyed the experience. We play Edmonton, and it's even different than the Ranger Islander series in the past. That was just this, they're the same fans. It's just Here is like the whole city. If we beat them, it's like the city gets picked up. You could feel it, everybody. And we lose to them, and it's just like this whole southern Alberta has a sag to it. And so it's sort of a neat, the fabric of the game up here in Canada is so neat to be a part of because people do care. Arizona was a great place to work. Really good fans down there. The trouble is they'd come to the game winning or losing. They'd have a good time. And we never were able to win enough to develop this culture that demands you're winning. Here, it's winning or misery, quite frankly. It's probably the way it should be in most places. And so I'm really enjoying my time up here.
And Don, speaking of Southern Alberta being happy when you get a win, you certainly must have been happy when you beat the guys up north 4-1.
Well, yeah, let's not kid ourselves. Edmonton were good. I mean, if you ask me, okay, Don, who's the best in the West or who are the threats in the West? I mean, Edmonton, I know they've come off a slow start. They did lose a little speed with some of the changes in their lineup, some little youth and speed, but they're good. They're really, really, really a good team. So as much as you look at the Colorados and Edmontons and maybe got off to a little slower start, don't kid yourself. Those are legit Stanley Cup competing teams. And so for us to win there, it was great. We went in there. We played well. You could tell their top players weren't quite engaged. As we all know, in October, there's October hockey and November hockey. Then there's the real hockey when January, February, March, and beyond.
I want to ask you too, before I hand it back over to my partner here, Don, your role in the past as a GM and an assistant GM, you do a lot of scouting. I know how much you enjoy scouting. I know how much you enjoy going to games and watching talent and evaluating talent. And now you're in this role as president of hockey ops, which wasn't around in our day. I mean, when you were with the Islanders, I was with the Rangers, or you were with Phoenix. Tell me about that role and what you do as president of hockey ops in coordination with Craig Conroy, the GM.
Yeah, Neil, it is a different role to an extent. Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. I do enjoy going to games. I do enjoy going to junior games, and I've always have. This role is a little more. I deal with the ownership on a regular basis, so there's a lot more interaction with the ownership, and consequently, I'm around the team probably a lot more. I work with Craig. Now, Craig Conroy is a new general manager. He last year was his first year. And quite frankly, the challenges we had last year with the players we had to sign or trade, it was almost overwhelming for a new manager. And Craig had been working in the sport, as an assistant and with the team for a long time. But what I found, there was just so many things that were going on around the team. And I'll say this to Craig Conroy. There's no bigger advocate for the Calgary Flames, the city of Calgary, Alberta, playing here. He's an American kid from New York, upstate New York, that came to Calgary, loves Calgary, raised 3 daughters in Calgary, and he's no bigger advocate for this city. And but that's all that being said, he needed some mentorship, help, direction, as much as I could provide. We actually had Dave Nonis, was a GM in Vancouver and Toronto. He's on our staff as a senior vice president, assistant manager. So we were able to get some other people with some managerial experience to help Craig kind of guide him. And again, like Ryan, I've noticed a marked change in Craig, just maturing, understanding the role and the people he has to deal with, from agents to other managers. So it's been, in that sense, quite frankly, I wouldn't say it's a crucial role. The general manager's role, in my mind, is it's not a great job. To be honest with you, it's a crappy job. I mean, it takes over your life. It's 24/7. I know there's great things. You get paid well, the accolades, you're the face of a franchise. When it comes down to actual living, that was my problem as a manager. You can never turn it off. And I don't care whether it's mid-December or mid-July or August, you're always on. You have to be on, and you're always thinking and trying to figure out how do we win here. My job here is taking a step back and just taking a kind of a bigger picture look, and where are we going and what's our staffing look like, and trying to, Craig bounces things off me all the time. I do the same to him, challenge him in certain things. So it's, in a lot of ways, you don't have my direct responsibility is obviously over the manager and the coaching staff, but it's more of a advisory role. And, I'm the one that hired him. I'm the one supporting him. I'm the one that hopefully we can bring glory and all good things back to Calgary. So in that sense, it's a little different. It's not the day-to-day grind that a manager faces, saying, okay, I got to talk to these 7 agents today or these 9 general managers, and these guys are trying to steal things from me and all that. You don't get that daily interaction. So I'm quite enjoying it. I was doing what I was doing, quite frankly, Neil, for quite some time with Brad Marchand, helping him. This has sort of rejuvenated me. It's given me like a new challenge, for lack of a better word. So I'm really, quite frankly, really enjoying it.
Part of that also is rebuilding the culture. And, you've mentioned how great it is to play in Calgary, how great Southern Alberta is. I'll tell you, I have vacationed up in the Banff and Lake Louise and Jasper areas several times already. And a week ago, you guys had a 4-day break in your schedule, and there was a team bonding up in Banff. Can you tell how important that was just to get the team together early in the season and really have everybody bond away from the ice?
Well, Vic, it was interesting because last year at the end of the season, we all do our exit meetings with players. And what I found interesting in that was that a couple of the younger players brought it up, that we came in, it was Zari, Poss, we came in, the guys are great, but it'd be nice to do a little bit more with the team to get to know each other. And I thought there were interesting observations from some of our younger players. And so I made a conscious, a lot of teams do this at the start of the year. They go somewhere and have a team building, team bonding event. And for us, we couldn't do it in training camp. It just, our schedule didn't allow it. So we had this break at the start of our season, and really it was a no-brainer. It's only an hour and 15 minutes up the road to Banff, which is an absolute gorgeous place. It wasn't that we had 18 things scheduled for the guys. They basically went in. They had some spa time on their own. Then we had a little kind of bowling pool tournament thing. The guys just love, this casual environment, everybody having a couple beers. And then we had a dinner and a couple comedians in there. It's quite frank, a little raunchy, but for a room full of guys, it was very entertaining. And so again, it's just another thing you try and do to pull the group together as everybody's trying to. We just know culture is so critical. And again, I go look back last year, guys, we had so many people with one foot out the door. We're trying to keep them. And then some of them were flip flopping in their mind. One day they were going to sign with us. The next day they were going to take their time and wait. And then, we experienced that, unfortunately, with Johnny Gaudreau and his passing, which we're all devastated by. But at the time of him, and I don't blame any player. That's their right to leave. But when you lose such good assets, and they walk out the door for nothing, it's a tough to recover from.
I find it also interesting that as the culture gets changed in Calgary, and you guys are off to the great start, as we mentioned before, you've also got a new arena coming in 3 years. So it seems that the trajectory is in the right place. New building, new enthusiasm, and perhaps Calgary becomes more of a go-to place for free agents downwind.
Well, Vic, you know what, as Neil could attest, players want to get paid, number one, but they want to have a chance to win. And that's the trouble when you go through this so-called rebuild. When you announce it to the world, we're rebuilding, which is basically saying, we don't expect to make the playoffs. And it's very hard to attract the players you want to attract, the leaders that are driven to. The reason we were able to get Nazem Kadri, we were able to sign Markstrom at the time, Tana was number one, they got paid. Number two, they saw us as a team that had a chance to win. And we know that you can't get those top free agents, or else you have to so dramatically overpay that nobody's happy. So we know we can't. Our thing is, and this really comes from the top down. And I do believe this in every business. It's the owners set the standard how you want to be and how you're going to perform. And we're saying we want to be a playoff team every year, but we also know we have to take some retooling steps here. We're not going to be trading our first round pick out for 33-year-old left winger that might get us, 30 goals. That's not going to happen. We have to draft better. We have to develop better. We look at Dallas as a model for us, saying, okay, yeah, they got Heiskanen and they won a lottery and they were able to pick third overall, but they also got the Wyatt Johnsons of the world, the Robertsons of the world, the Ottingers. Those were late first, second round picks. You can do it, but you really need the Neil Smith type scouts that see talent, can look at talent and say, hey, this is a guy that can be a frontline player. And that's what we have to do.
So with that in mind, Don, I also wanted to ask you, you did sign Tyson Barrie on a 1-year deal, and currently you have $19 million in cap space. And by the end of the season, you're projected to have just under $18 million. So there is some money there. And if the team performs well and you're in that playoff hunt once we get to March, is there the possibility that you'll take on some bigger contracts to bolster this team?
100%. We'd do it today if we had the right player. And one thing, our ownership, they're committed. If we went to them and said, we've got a guy here making $14 million, we think he can help us win long term, they would do it. And that's the beauty of being in Calgary. I lived for a long time in Arizona, where you're watching your nickels and dimes like a hawk, just trying to survive. And you can get away with a little bit where, you get a hot goalie and but it's not sustainable in a league that's so good with so many talented people running clubs. So no, this isn't a situation where we say, we're going to be at the bottom. Let's save our $19 million. We're committed to winning. I think in a cap world, flexibility is so critical. And we haven't had a lot of it the last couple of seasons. We've had good players. And unfortunately, we didn't win. It would have been nice for us to win a few rounds over the last few years when we had the group of players that we had, or when Tkachuk was here, and Bennett's and Gaudreau's and Lindholm's. That was a good base, but we just never could get far enough along to really make a serious run at a cup. So we're in a little different phase right now, but our owners are committed to winning, spending. Understand that you have to spend to win, but we're just being prudent about how we're going to go about spending and when.
Don, I wanted to touch on the business side of this just for a minute, because I think there's a lot of people that listen to our show that are in the United States And that's where most of our listeners come from, obviously, with my background in New York, and that we spike towards an American audience. And a lot of people would not know about Calgary, Alberta, and the challenges of doing business in a 32-team league for a Canadian team. And you have some advantages in that you have no income tax, provincial income tax, I believe. You have some disadvantages, huge disadvantages in taking in Canadian dollars at the gate and paying out American dollars to the players. Could you just talk about that for a minute? Because we know how committed your ownership is, but I also want people to know that commitment is huge because they're taking in Canadian money and paying out American money, and there's a big difference in the exchange rate.
Yeah. Neil, that's the big, it's not just us. It's every Canadian team. It's a real challenge. Every day we get up and look at the exchange rate and say, oh God, it moved by a penny. That's going to cost us $1 million more today. Or it's the reality of the business. Everything gets paid in US. The players get paid in US dollars. We bring in a lot of our revenue in Canadian dollars. And, so it's a challenge. Let's face it. It's supposed to snow here today in the middle of October, and we're not going to practice in flip flops and our golf carts here. So there's some lifestyle issues. If you're a young guy, maybe a single guy, you might like the Californias or there is a provincial tax here now that wasn't here a number of years ago, but we are certainly not at the level of the, Toronto's or Montreal's, their tax base. So yeah, there's some real challenges of, on the positive side, from a family, if you have a family, it really is a great community, good schools. It's really a small city. And, I think the family, people with young children love playing here. What I found being up here, when you draft a U.S. player, you really hope they meet a Calgary girl, quite frankly, because if they stick with the high school sweetheart from back in Boston, there's a very good chance when they're ready to go, they're going. So that's all part of the challenge of being with the team in Canada. It's not without its difficulties.
And are your eyes also paying attention and a lot of the time to this John Tavares issue going on in Ontario with the tax suit that the government has brought against him for the signing bonus?
Yeah, we're well aware of it. It's there's a number of things that you can do as up in Canada, and one of them is you can take a portion of your salary and put it into a fund, and you can't touch it again until you leave. But it's taxed at a much lower rate. It's not taxed I think it's a 15% tax rate. So there are some tax advantages here. But yeah, this Tavares thing is quite fascinating to see whether, I don't want to comment. I don't know enough about it to see, but how that gets ruled on, may have a direct effect on again, us Canadian clubs.
Yeah, for sure.
Don, before we let you go, we talked about you playing in New York and came up Valentine's evening in 1979. Your first shift came out from behind the net, if I recall correctly, stuffed one past Gilles Gilbert. I actually tried to find the goal, but I actually found more Don Maloney fights than I found Don Maloney goals on YouTube.
Wow, that must have been that's a surprise. I noticed you didn't say winning fights, because then you wouldn't find any on YouTube. But fights, I can see a couple. But no, that was a very exciting time in my life. Getting up, my brother Dave was the captain of the team, of course, and got put on the line with Phil Esposito, who was kind of wandering. It wasn't having a great season. Donnie Murdoch, and we kind of connected. So that was, the sad thing, guys, that was in 1979. We went to the Stanley Cup Finals. We lose in 5 games. I was 20 years old. I remember I was so exhausted at the end of that. I'm just, okay, well, we'll just win it next. Well, we're going to win it next year. Like it's done. We're winning it next year for sure. I'm 66 now. That was the last time I've ever been involved with a team that went to the finals. So I'm either real bad at what I do and I should have left this business a long time ago. But I'm still hoping, and it's been a great life and a great run, but it just shows you how hard it is to win. I don't care at whatever level, and especially at NHL level, the battle of what it takes to go through. And again, he's gone through it. He knows the commitment and the drive you need to be a champion. And it's tough.
Well, you were 20, like you said, when you made that final, and you and Espo both had 20 points to lead the team that year. But my final piece to you is, so after that season ends, a lot of the players on that team wind up becoming celebrities. And there's the memorable Sassoon commercial with Anders Hedberg, Espo, Ron Duguay, and your brother Dave. So I want to know that, whether did he pull rank on you because he was the older brother, the team captain? Because certainly you have to have been able to have sung better than he did.
I would hope so. I mean, that was really sad, to be honest. But there actually was a second commercial done about a year later that I was involved with Espo and Duguay and Hedberg, but it wasn't quite as popular as the first. So I was back in the studio 54 days and the long hair days and all the good times. That was a fun time in my life.
And I'll never forget, Don, from my vantage point, and I've mentioned this to you in the past, I just want to make you chuckle about this again, but I didn't know you at the time I was scouting the Rangers and you were playing for them. I was with the Islanders, and you had the darkest 5 o'clock shadow of any player in the league. And I remember, like, your beard grew in quicker than anybody I'd ever seen. You must have had to shave like twice a day.
Yeah, it was I did, for whatever reason. Yeah, I don't know, as a family thing there, but that was sometimes 3 times a day. So depending on how late the night went. So all good.
Well, we really appreciate you coming on and doing this, and hopefully we can do it again down the road when you're in first place in February. And we say, remember, you promised to come back. So and we'd love to have Craig on at some point too. I know Craig a little bit from way back and stuff, but it's always great to see you. That's for sure, and it brings back such great memories of those years we spent together.
Yeah, it was. It really was a fun time in the late 90s. And again, you look at those rosters, Neil, and like, we had the right pieces, but it just didn't fit. Like, we had so many good players and you got people, we got them in there, but it goes back to the chemistry and the mix of your team. And so everything's a learning experience, but that was certainly a fun time in my life.
And the one thing that you and I have had, the unfortunate part about Calgary, we drafted a great Calgary junior player very high in the draft, if you remember, in 99, who'd scored 92 goals for the Calgary Hitmen, and it didn't work out for us. And everybody in the league, his name is escaping me. That's why I'm
Pavel Brendel doesn't escape.
Pavel Brendel.
We talk about him a lot around here, from a guy that basically, I remember the meeting we had with scouts. Scouts would say either hits the goalie, misses a net, or scores. He doesn't they don't make the save. That guy could shoot a puck. We thought he was the next Jagger. Our scouts did. Thought he was the next Jaromir Jagr. And we made a big deal, and it really was. Unfortunately, he wasn't the most driven player in the world. His work habits were poor, and really, he bounced around in Europe. He played a little time. He actually played a number of years in Europe, but never was seen again in North America.
It was incredible for a guy to score 92 goals in the Western League. Was unheard of. Like, we thought we were getting Mike Bossy from the Western League, and it didn't turn out that way. But then we also got Jamie in the first round later on, because I made a trade actually with Calgary to get him.
Exactly. Jamie Lundmark. Yeah. Who was
Jamie Lundmark.
Yeah. Again, it just shows you how critical drafting is. And in hindsight, they had the Sedins at the top of that draft, but after that, it wasn't a real deep draft year. And Lundmark ended up being just a serviceable player for a number of years. But when you're drafting the top 10, there's a lot of suffering, as we all know, to draft in the top 10. And you like to hit on frontline players, or top 2 lines. And unfortunately, I think in Jamie's case, it didn't quite. He was a good player for a long time, just not a star.
I will say, Don, that from that draft, the guy that deserves more credit than he's ever gotten is Brian Burke and what he did to get both Sedins. At the time, I didn't even think about that. He set up the Vancouver Canucks for 2 decades by getting those two guys in there.
Yeah, it was remarkable. It was remarkable. I mean, he probably doesn't get enough. Last thing Brian Burke needs to hear somebody say good things about him. And I love Brian. He's a good friend of mine.
Too.
But no, it really was. I mean, as much as it is winning a cup, what he did, how he manipulated that to end up with both Sedins was magical, quite frankly. And to your point, it set that Vancouver team up for decades.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Don. This has been great. And good luck. Keep going.
Okay, thanks, guys. Nice chatting with you.
And don't forget, our website is NHLWraparound.com and also Wraparound Short Shifts. Neil and I will be on every Wednesday and Friday to kind of bridge our regular Wraparound shows. So, Neil, something interesting that every year we see early in the season certain metrics that are put out by the NHL in terms of height and weight and age. And the 6 oldest clubs in the NHL are paired up in a rather fascinating way. So the clubs kind of in the win now mode are 1 and 2, and that's Edmonton with an average age of 30.6. Nashville, 30.2. The third and fourth teams are what we would, I think, call middle of the pack clubs. Pittsburgh at 30 years of age and the Islanders at 29.5. And then clubs 5 and 6 aren't they supposed to be younger because they're aspiring to get back in the playoffs? And that's the Chicago Blackhawks at 29.4 and Detroit at 29.3. How do you read that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult read. I think it's easy to say, well, we know what Edmonton and Nashville is trying to do, although Nashville has not had a very good start. So it's going to be tough for them to win now with the start that they've had. But moving past that, Pittsburgh's an older team. We've talked about this before, that are they trying to rebuild or are they trying to go for it? And it seems like, again, they're trying to go for it. And they do have an older team at 30 years old. The Islanders are a middle of the pack team, probably a playoff team, a wild card team, perhaps in the East. Curious that they're a little bit older than maybe would be optimal for where they are in the league. And then under the, shouldn't they be younger? I think Chicago has some real good young talent there. And they're surrounding it with some older players. And that's how they're trying to build that organization up and that's where you get that average age going up to 29.4. Detroit, probably the same thing. They're probably trying to surround their young guys with guys that know how to win. Not working out too well in Detroit so far this season. I believe in them a little bit more than what their record is, but we'll see as the season goes on.
It was just fascinating, just the way those 3 pairs seem to line up. So it was a point worth mentioning, right? I'm going to give you a handful of player items. Want to see if anything jumps off the page to you. Saturday in Utah, Brad Marchand turned a puck over at the Utah blue line. The Utah Hockey Club wound up scoring a goal, which was later disallowed. But Jim Montgomery went down to the end of the bench and absolutely chewed on his captain. For me, is there something to be said that Montgomery would go right down to the bench and really get on the guy that is supposed to be the leader of the club?
I think it's great because Jim Montgomery's a player's coach. I mean, we've had him on our show. We know what he's like, and he's a real good man. And but you know what? He's got to do what he's got to do from time to time. And one thing about the head coach, Jim Montgomery, is he knows the personality of his players and particularly of his captain. So he'll know or did know the right time to do that, I'm sure, because that's what makes a good coach good. And so I'm glad to see it. And I think it's good for the younger players to see there's no exceptions on this bench. You turn the puck over, you're going to hear about it.
And I'm sure that Marchand understands exactly where his coach is coming from, because frankly, it's pretty unusual for Montgomery to be that demonstrative.
Absolutely. I think that he probably had a talk to him about things in the past, and, here it happened again. And so he wasn't going to let it go by.
A couple of milestones, players reaching 1,000 games. Luke Shen was honored Saturday in Nashville. It was actually his 1,001st game, the Nashville game against Detroit. He winds up scoring a goal. Tyler Myers plays his 1,000th game Saturday in Philadelphia, picks up an assist. Here's one that I really enjoyed. The Joseph brothers, Matthew and Pierre-Olivier, team up for a goal Saturday against Carolina. Matthew was acquired in a trade from Ottawa on July 2nd. His brother signs the next day, and for the first time, they pair up on a goal together.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's a great story. I remember seeing his parents when Ottawa would play Pittsburgh, and one parent would have on the Ottawa jersey and one parent would have on the Pittsburgh jersey, so they weren't taking sides.
Finally, Brian Little signed a one-day contract Sunday to retire with the Winnipeg Jets, played 843 games over 13 seasons, and that dates all the way back to the franchise roots in Atlanta.
Yeah, that's really cool too. And if you don't know it, it's hard for people to understand that the Winnipeg Jets are the Atlanta Thrashers, and the Winnipeg Jets of the original Winnipeg Jets, I guess now are the suspended franchise that sits in Phoenix. So their records from the original Winnipeg Jets are in somewhere out in the hyperspace. They're not being used right now.
No, they're not. But just going back to Little for a second, just a really nice ceremony and a nice celebration for a player that gave his entire career to the same franchise.
Yeah, it's really great. And you talk about players not wanting to play here, not wanting to play there. Well, if you ask Brian Little, he played in Atlanta, which is a southern, very warm, nice climate. And then he played in the freezing cold of Winnipeg. But they tell me that when you play in Winnipeg, there's no place that treats their players better than the people of Winnipeg, Manitoba.
And that was certainly evident yesterday with the little ceremony that they held for him. This is the human side of the story. And Neil, I was going through some of the birthdays that show up on NHL.com, and on Sunday, Garry Monahan celebrated his 78th birthday. And Monahan was, I'd say, probably just a marginal NHL player, but he certainly has a very significant place in NHL history.
Being the first ever amateur draft pick back in 1963 by the Montreal Canadiens. And why is that of some significance? Well, he was actually 16 years old at the time, and Clarence Campbell, the president of the NHL, had decided that he wanted to give all teams in the NHL the equal chance to get a star player. So those that weren't on what they called sponsorship lists, and that was back in the day that everybody had a team in junior hockey that they sponsored. We had Don Maloney on the show earlier. Guess what? He played for the Kitchener Rangers. He wasn't sponsored, but that still is a team in the Ontario League that was started by the New York Rangers, and that's why it's called the Kitchener Rangers. There was a team, of course, in Oshawa, the Boston Bruins had sponsorship of that. In St. Catharines, there were the St. Catharines Teepees that were the Chicago Blackhawks sponsored team in junior hockey, and so on. The Toronto Maple Leafs had the Toronto Marlies that they sponsored, and that's where all their prospects went. But you'd literally go out, you'd scout players and sign them to a sponsorship card, and then they would play for your junior team, and then you had their rights going forward. So you can imagine that Montreal and Toronto were grabbing all the best players because a lot of the players were Canadians playing in either the province of Quebec or the province of Ontario. And it left the 4 American teams with not as great a chance to get the good players. In fact, Gordie Howe wouldn't have ended up with Detroit had the Rangers not made a horrible mistake. They had him at training camp and cut him. So the draft got started back in 1963 to give teams a chance to get these players that weren't on sponsorship lists to draft them. Interestingly, the teams weren't allowed to talk to them about playing professional hockey until they turned 18. And then at that time, they had 72 hours to sign the player to a contract, or they didn't have his rights anymore. So that was the start of the amateur draft, something that we see today with all the glitz and glamour and everything of the Sphere in Las Vegas this past summer. 32 teams picking. The young Celebrini goes to San Jose, and their hopes are all pinned on him. Last year, Connor Bedard going to Chicago Blackhawks, and they're instantaneously celebrities now when you're picked at that high in the draft. I don't think that was the case in Montreal for Garry Monahan in 1963.
A little bit of a difference from the Sphere in 2024, and probably a very quiet atmosphere at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel in 63. And that will do it for this edition of NHL Wraparound. Thanks to Flames President of Hockey Operations, Don Maloney, for joining us. And thank you to our listeners. Send questions or comments to nhlwraparound@gmail.com. And don't forget our website, nhlwraparound.com. And also, Neil and I will be back on Wednesday with our short shifts with more immediate in-depth coverage around the NHL. All 32 teams in action on Tuesday night. So on behalf of Neil, I'm Vic, and we will talk to you on Wednesday.
Thanks for joining us on the NHL Wraparound podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on all the NHL action.